It's early morning in Boston. The city is just waking up with the smell of roasted coffee, the shuttle of commuters, and the hum of a summer Sunday. But behind an alley on Bolston Street, a homeless man is about to make a discovery that will freeze the city in shock. He opens a dumpster and finds something that would turn his world upside down. It was a young woman who came from Sweden to America with the hopes of having a beautiful experience, only to vanish into one of Boston's darkest mysteries. And nearly 3 decades later, no one has been charged, no one has confessed, and the question still lingers. Who killed Karina Holmer? Hello everyone, and welcome back to Crime Psyche with me, Drea, where we explore the human stories and the headlines behind them. Today's case is one that still haunts investigators and true crime followers alike. The unsolved 1996 murder of Karina Holmer, a Swedish au pair whose disappearance and death left behind more questions than answers. Her story isn't just about tragedy, it's about vulnerability, cultural contrast, and the way innocence can collide with danger in the unlikeliest of places. Boston in the mid-1990s was a city alive with energy and evolution. The old of Beacon Hill met the glass towers of Big Bay. College students filled every cafe. Tourists swarmed Faneuil Hall, and the streets buzzed with nightlife. By day, Boston was steeped in tradition. The Freedom Trail, the Red Sox, and the smell of the ocean wind off the harbor. When evening fell, the city transformed with neon lights, pulsing music, and a nightlife that seemed never-ending. Clubs like Zanzibar, The Rack, and Bill's Bar brought in crowds of students, professionals, and tourists, each weekend becoming its own small carnival of sound and energy. And among those who came to the city seeking opportunity was Karina. She hadn't arrived through a student or government exchange program. Instead, it was a stroke of luck, a lottery ticket won back home that gave her the chance to chase a dream. It was the start of something new, a first taste of freedom, of independence, and of countless possibilities. She used the winnings to contact a private au pair agency, one that helped young women find work and host families in the United States. So she hopped on a plane and traveled more than 4,000 miles from Sweden to begin her own American chapter. That decision, a simple, hopeful choice, would set the course for everything that followed. And that summer, the line between freedom and danger would blur, and what began as an adventure would end in a mystery that still defies explanation. It was just after sunrise on June 23, 1996. The streets of Boston were quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over a city after long Saturday nights. In an alley off Bolston Street, near Fenway Park, a 53-year-old man experiencing homelessness was searching through a dumpster for returnable bottles and cans. It was something he did most mornings, long before the city woke up. As he sifted through trash bags, one in particular caught his attention. This one seemed larger and heavier than the rest, and his curiosity took over. But when he pulled it open, what he found stopped him cold in his tracks. At first, he thought it might have been a mannequin, something that was probably thrown away after a window display. But then, he quickly realized that it wasn't plastic that he was looking at. It was actually part of a human. He stumbled back, terrified, and ran down the street, screaming in horror for help. Police were called, and within minutes, squad cars surrounded the area, and the alley was sealed off. What they found inside that dumpster would send shocks throughout Boston and haunt investigators for decades. Inside the dumpster lay the upper half of a young woman's body, severed at the waist. There was little to no blood in or around the container, which was a detail that was noted from the very beginning. For detectives, one thing was immediately clear. Where the body was found was not where the murder had taken place. Whoever had killed Karina had done so somewhere else, and then transported her remains in the early hours of the morning to quietly dispose of them in the heart of downtown. And yet, the question that loomed over every investigator, every reporter, every resident of Boston was the same. Where was the rest of her? Before she became a headline, before her name was whispered in fear and fascination, she was simply Karina. Born in Sweden, Karina Holmer grew up in a small, close-knit town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. Friends remembered her as gentle, cheerful, and full of curiosity. She loved animals, music, and photography. Her family described her as someone who smiled easily and who saw the best in others. Her mother said she had a light in her eyes, that even when times were hard, Karina believed things would always work out. Like many European teenagers, Karina wanted to see the world. When the opportunity arose for her to travel and experience the United States, she didn't hesitate. It was a dream opportunity to live in America, improve her English, save money, and experience a different life. In March of 1996, Karina boarded a plane bound for Boston, Massachusetts. She had already secured work through an au-pair agency, which placed her with a family in Dover, which is a small, affluent suburb west of the city. With the money that she'd won in a Swedish lottery, she paid her way to America, a future packed neatly in her suitcases and a heart full of hope. When Karina arrived in Massachusetts, she moved in with her host family, Frank Rapp and Susan Nitcher, a professional couple living in Dover. Frank was a commercial photographer and advertising executive, and Susan was a painter and art professor at a local college. Together, they were the kind of cultured, accomplished family the au pair agencies liked to feature in their brochures. Stable, artistic, and outwardly kind. The arrangement was simple. Karina would care for the couple's 2 young children, help around the house, and have weekends free to explore the city. At first, everything seemed perfect. In her early letters home to Sweden, she wrote about how she adored the children and how beautiful Massachusetts was in the spring. She told her parents she loved the independence of living abroad, and her friends said she sounded so happy and so full of life. On her weekends off, Karina and other au pairs that she had met began taking the train into Boston. They'd go shopping, explore the city, visit cafes, and dance at nightclubs. Places with energy and rhythm that reminded her of the freedom she'd been chasing when she left home. But as the weeks continued passing, her correspondence began to change. The bright, excited tone in her letters gave way to something quieter. Shorter messages, fewer exclamation points, with less talk of adventure. Friends back home noticed. She began writing that she felt homesick, that life in America wasn't quite what she had imagined. And then came one letter that left them deeply unsettled. Karina wrote to a friend, "Something terrible happened. I cannot tell you right now what it is, but I will tell you when I get home." No one knows what she meant, and she never got the chance to explain. Friday, June 21st, 1996, was the first official night of summer, and for Karina, it meant one thing: midsommar. Back in Sweden, this was a time of bonfires, laughter, and endless delights. In Boston, she would celebrate it in her own way, with friends, music, and the pulse of a city that felt alive with possibility. Karina embraced the city's vibrant youth culture. She loved music and dancing, and often went out with other au pairs and European friends she'd met since arriving. On Ballston Place, just off Tremont Street, Karina, radiant in a metallic silver top, her hair pulled back in a playful ponytail, with a small black purse slung across her shoulder, decided to make her way to Club Zanzibar with her friends. This was a popular nightclub known for its pulsing Europop and late-night energy. The line outside the club stretched down the alley, students, travelers, and tourists all chasing one last night before the weekend settled in. Inside Zanzibar, the music thumped, with lights flashing across mirrored walls. The air was heavy with sweat and perfume and energy. Karina was seen dancing, laughing, and at times moving from group to group, her smile wide and her movements carefree. Several witnesses would later recall her being in good spirits, happy, maybe a little bit tipsy. Another remembered her dancing alone for a short while, then joining a group of men she didn't seem to know too well. By the early hours of Saturday, June 22nd, 1996, the night was winding down inside Zanzibar. Around 3 a.m., the lights came up and the music began fading. Staff began ushering people out onto Ballston Place, the narrow brick area behind the club. Outside, the summer air was thick and humid, buzzing with laughter, taxi horns, and the echoes of a city that did not want to sleep. Karina's friends had already started heading home, one by one. When they asked if she was coming, she smiled and told them she wanted to stay a little longer. She wasn't ready for the night to end. By 3:20 a.m., witnesses saw her outside the club, standing beneath a streetlight, singing and dancing with a man who appeared to be experiencing homelessness. Several people later told police that Karina seemed disoriented, as if she'd lost track of her friends. Others recalled her saying she needed to find a ride back to Dover, an almost impossible task at that hour. A few accounts described her speaking to a different man, tall, dark hair, possibly wearing shorts and a t-shirt, standing beside a Jeep Cherokee parked near the club. One nightclub doorman later told police that he saw Karina talking briefly with that man before walking away with him down the alley. After that, she was gone. By Sunday morning, her friends began to worry. She hadn't returned to her host family's home, she hadn't called, she hadn't been seen by anyone who knew her, so by that afternoon, they reported her missing. At that point, no one could have imagined the horror that awaited when her body would be found less than 2 miles away. The hours after 3:20 a.m. marked the darkest and most haunting gap in this case, a stretch of time in which Karina Holmer slipped from the neon-lit streets of Boston into silence. She was seen laughing, singing, full of joy, and then she was simply gone. No more sightings, no more phone calls, no trace of her boarding a train or a taxi. From that moment in the alley, just after the club emptied into the warm summer air, nearly 30 hours would pass before anyone saw Karina again. And when she was found, it was in a way that no one could have imagined. The morning after the discovery, the Boston Police Department faced one of the most disturbing cases in the city's history. A young woman dismembered. No weapon, no witnesses, and no clear motive. Her remains were taken to the Boston Medical Examiner's office, and Karina was identified within hours through fingerprints and missing person reports. News spread almost instantly. The story hit headlines across the US and Europe. Detectives quickly realized this wasn't just a murder, it was a message of some sort. The level of control, the precision of the dismemberment, the near total absence of blood, it all pointed to a killer who had worked somewhere else. Someone who had time, privacy, and possibly experience. So the first question asked was, where was Karina killed? There was no sign of a struggle or blood inside the dumpster or anywhere nearby. Forensics confirmed that her body had been cleaned before being placed there. So whoever did this had access to running water, space, and enough time to work meticulously, all before dawn. And the other half of Karina's body, her lower torso and legs, has never been found. For investigators, this missing half wasn't just disturbing, it held crucial forensic evidence, such as DNA, trauma markers, or possibly even the cause of death itself. Without it, they can only speculate. The autopsy revealed no drug in her system and only a minimal amount of alcohol, far less than what witnesses recalled. Despite reports that she'd appeared intoxicated that night, apparently, science told a different story. There were indications that she may have been strangled or suffocated before her demise, though the official cause of death remains undetermined. Early theories exploded across local media. Was it a ritual killing, a jealous lover, a random predator, or something even darker, a serial offender who had done this before? But as detectives examined leads, their focus kept circling back to the people closest to Karina, those who shared her daily life, who saw her not as a mystery but as a person. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to shift. Without witnesses, without the rest of her remains, and without a clear motive, the search for truth gave way to speculation. Every name, every rumor, every shadow became a suspect. And before long, one name began to surface more than any other: the family she lived with, her host family. To the outside world, the household of Frank Rapp and Susan Nitcher might have seemed ideal, a stable working environment. But as investigators dug deeper, questions began to surface. Frank was known to move in Boston's bohemian art circles, often socializing with musicians and other artists who frequented the city's nightlife. Detectives learned that Karina occasionally joined him and others from that circle at gatherings, small parties, openings, with late nights filled with music and conversation. Rumors quickly followed. Some whispered that Karina had developed a crush on Frank. Others claimed she'd confided that she felt uncomfortable in the home. None of these claims were ever substantiated. Still, they lingered, quietly feeding one of the most enduring theories in the case. As the story spread online and in tabloids, the public's curiosity began to extend beyond Frank. Some began to look closely at Susan, his wife, and an art professor known for her surreal, sometimes unsettling paintings that explored the human form and emotional disconnection. To certain onlookers, a work, entirely unrelated to the crime, seemed eerie in the light of what had happened. It was pure speculation, perhaps a reflection of how tragedy can distort public perception, Yet, it added another layer to the growing mythology of the case, that perhaps something darker lurked beneath the surface of an otherwise ordinary home. When questioned, both Frank and Susan fully cooperated with police. They allowed searches of their home, their cars, and even Frank's South Boston studio apartment, a space that Karina and her friends sometimes used on weekends when they went out in the city. Frank told detectives that he'd been out of town that weekend visiting family, and Susan confirmed his alibi. Nothing incriminating was ever found. No physical evidence tied them to the crime. And months later, investigators publicly cleared the couple of any involvement. But as the weeks turned into months and then years, the case of Karina Holmer became less about evidence and more about speculation. Without witnesses, without the rest of her remains, and without a clear motive, Boston filled the silence with theories. Every rumor, every whisper, every shadow would become a suspect. And even though Frank and Susan were officially exonerated, the optics, a young foreign nanny, an affluent family, and a crime that felt uncomfortably intimate ensured that their names would never completely fade from the conversation. Detectives also focused on the last confirmed people to see Karina alive outside Zanzibar. One was a bouncer, who told police he saw her leave the club alone around 3 a.m. But his story slightly shifted between interviews. Sometimes he said she was alone, other times he mentioned a man was with her. That inconsistency led investigators to wonder, was he confused or was he hiding something? In one version, he described her walking away with a possibly tall, athletic, dark-haired man near a dark Jeep Cherokee parked close to the club. Police issued public calls for anyone matching that description, but no one matching that man's description ever came forward, and no Jeep was traced to anyone connected to Karina. Some believe this was the killer, a stranger she had met that night, perhaps offering her a ride home. Others think the Jeep sighting was a false memory, a detail blurred by time and confusion in the chaos of closing hour. Either way, that fleeting image, Karina walking away in the dark, remains the last known moment of her life. Then there was Alex Stevens, a Boston artist and street performer whose eccentric behavior caught police attention in the days after the murder. Stevens was known around the area for his bizarre street art, including carrying a severed pig's head on a stick through the streets as part of a performance piece. The pig's head and the theatrics of it all, combined with his physical proximity to the crime scene, drew suspicion. Stevens was interrogated and his apartment was searched, but police found no evidence tying him to Karina or the murder. He told reporters he felt hunted by rumor, that he was just an artist, misunderstood in a city desperate for answers. He eventually moved away, and years later, he maintained his innocence in multiple interviews. Still, for many in Boston, his name became intertwined with Karina's story. The strange, macabre imagery forever linked to the city's most unsettling unsolved case. As years passed with no arrest, some began to see Karina's death not as an isolated act, but as part of a larger pattern. Between the early 1990s and early 2000s, multiple young women in the Northeast were found dead under unusual circumstances, often after nights out. This cluster of cases became known online as the smiley face killings, though law enforcement has never confirmed any connection. Some amateur investigators speculated that Karina's case fit the pattern: a young, intoxicated victim leaving the bar, last seen with a stranger, and later found in a stage or posed condition. But there's one major difference. Karina's murder was not accidental, it was deliberate. Still, the similarities in geography and victim profile keep this theory alive among those who believe Boston may have hidden a predator during the 1990s. And then there's the most unsettling theory of all, the one that's more myth than evidence. Some early investigators suggested the manner of Karina's dismemberment might hold symbolic meaning, that the killer intentionally removed parts of her body as an act of humiliation or ritual. A few fringe theories tied this to Boston's underground art scene, claiming it was a twisted commentary performance turned real. Others suspected it reflected misogynistic rage, an attempt to erase a woman's identity by destroying her femininity. Police have never endorsed any ritual or artistic explanation, and no evidence has ever supported it. But the brutality of the act and absence of logic made many wonder if the killer was sending a message only they could understand. The simplest and perhaps the most likely explanation is also the most haunting, that Karina crossed paths with someone she didn't know, a stranger who saw an opportunity, a man who offered her a ride home and lured her into safety, someone with access to a private location, tools, and the composure to carry out the act and disappear. If that's true, then Karina's killer may have walked past detectives, reporters, and neighbors with a face easily lost in the crowd. Forensics determined the dark green plastic trash used in Karina's disposal were common commercial grade, available at hardware stores and used by local businesses. The only traceable item was a small piece of twine tied around the opening, standard janitorial supply offering no leads. But there were no fingerprints, no hair, and no fibers. Whoever dumped her knew exactly what they were doing. Investigators suspected the killer drove her body from one location to another, likely in the early morning hours between 4 and 6 a.m. while the city slept. Some believe the vehicle may have been a van or SUV, spacious enough to conceal remains without attracting attention. Despite hundreds of interviews, thousands of man-hours, and international headlines, the case grew cold fast. Swedish officials flew in to assist. The FBI offered support, but the physical evidence was too limited. DNA testing at the time was still in its infancy, and surveillance cameras were also rare. By late 1996, investigators had little more than theories, and one devastating truth, that Karina's killer had vanished into the noise of the city. For her friends and family, there was no closure, only questions. Who was the man she was last seen with? Where did the rest of her go? And why, after 3 decades, no one has come forward? Karina Holmer's story is not just a case file, it's a wound that never healed. In 3 decades, her name has echoed through true crime circles, Boston folklore, and quiet corners of the internet. But behind every theory and headline was a young woman with dreams, a girl from a small Swedish town who wanted to see the world. She came to the United States chasing the same dream so many had before her, to work, to travel, and to build something of her own. In the short time she lived in Massachusetts, she was described by everyone who knew her as bright, kind, curious, and endlessly alive. Her friends remembered her love for adventure, her joy for dancing, and her laughter that filled the room. Her host family's children remembered her as gentle, patient, and fun, the big sister that they never had. When the news of her death reached Sweden, it shook her small hometown to its core. Vigils were held, candles were lit, and hundreds gathered in silence, carrying white flowers and photographs, determined that she'd be remembered not as a victim, but as a daughter, a friend, and a symbol of innocence lost. In the years since, her case has become something larger than itself, a reminder of how fragile safety can be, and how quickly a dream can turn into tragedy. Murder exposed gaps in nightlife safety, international au pair protections, and the way police handle cases involving foreign nationals. It also raised enduring questions about media fascination, how some victims are immortalized in mystery, while others fade into silence. What makes Karina's story so haunting isn't just that her killer was never found, it's that she was one of thousands who came to new countries full of hope, believing in the promise of safety, only to find danger in the most ordinary moments. The last night of her life wasn't extraordinary. It was supposed to be fun, a night out with friends, a celebration. And that's what makes this unforgettable. Today, if you walk down Boston Place, past where Club Zanzibar once stood, there's nothing there that marks the spot. The neon lights are gone, and the noise replaced by the hum of a city that's moved on. But somewhere in Boston's collective memory, her story lingers. A reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, and that unanswered questions can echo for a lifetime. Karina Holmer was a young lady with a promising future. She came to America to live, not to become a mystery. And though her case remains unsolved, her story continues to speak, not just about tragedy, but about how deeply we all long to be seen, to be safe, and to be remembered. Thank you for watching today's episode of Crime Psyche. We've gone through some of the leading theories in this case, from those closest to her to the strangers she might have met that night. But what do you think happened to Karina Holmer? Do you think any of these theories make sense? Or do you believe that there's something we're missing? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, because I cannot wait to hear your thoughts, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, take care, stay aware, and remember that every name deserves to be remembered. Bye.